When historians describe the settlement of America, they usually focus on the pioneers, the wagon trains, the homesteaders, the brave families who carved civilization from wilderness. But the real story, the one that barely appeared in newspapers, the one that even today sits buried in census archives and city planning records, began with a question that no one was supposed to ask. Who built the cities? Not who founded them, not who named them, who physically built them. Because when you examine the construction records, the population figures, and the architectural evidence, a disturbing pattern emerges. Cities that appeared fully formed. Infrastructure that couldn't have been built by the populations that supposedly lived there. And orphanages, thousands of orphanages, filled with children who had no parents, no histories, and no explanation for where they came from. The official story calls them orphans of war, disease, and poverty. The evidence suggests something else, entirely. Something was removed from America, and the children were what remained. The first anomaly is the construction timeline. San Francisco in 1850 had an official population of 21,000 people. By 1855, 5 years later, the city had over 500 brick and stone buildings in the downtown district, a functional sewer system, paved streets extending over 15 miles, gas lighting infrastructure, multiple churches, hotels, and government buildings of elaborate construction. The question is simple. Who built all of this? 500 brick buildings in 5 years requires approximately 50 million bricks. At the production rates of 1850s brick kilns, that would require 200 kilns operating continuously for 5 years. There is no record of 200 brick kilns in early San Francisco. There is no record of the fuel to fire them. There is no record of the workers to operate them. The bricks appeared, the buildings appeared, the infrastructure appeared, as if it was already there. The second anomaly is the architectural sophistication. Photographs of American cities in the 1850s and 1860s show buildings that shouldn't exist. Chicago in 1858, St. Louis in 1855, Cincinnati in 1852, Detroit in 1860. The photographs show grand stone structures with elaborate facades, columns, cornices, detailed stonework that requires master craftsmen and years of labor. But these cities were supposedly frontier towns, founded decades, sometimes just years, before the photographs were taken. Where did the master stonemasons come from? Where did they train? Where are their names in the historical record? The answer is, they're not there. The craftsmen who supposedly built these buildings don't appear in city directories, census records, or professional registries. The buildings exist. The builders don't. The third anomaly is the population mathematics. Let's examine Chicago more closely. Chicago was incorporated as a city in 1837. Population 4,170. By 1860, the population was 112,000. That's a 27-fold increase in 23 years. The growth came supposedly from immigration. Irish, German, Scandinavian, families seeking opportunity in the new American West. But the infrastructure tells a different story. The streets of Chicago in 1860 could accommodate a population of 300,000. The sewer capacity was designed for 250,000. The building stock could house nearly 500,000. Why would a city of 112,000 build infrastructure for 300,000? The official explanation is planning for growth. But frontier cities didn't plan for growth. They built what they needed. They expanded when demand required it. Unless the infrastructure wasn't built for growth, unless the infrastructure was built for a population that was already there, a population that was removed. The orphan trains began in 1854. Between 1854 and 1929, approximately 250,000 children were transported from eastern cities to the Midwest and West on what became known as orphan trains. The official story is that these children were orphans and street children from overcrowded eastern cities. They were sent west to find families, to escape poverty, to start new lives. The Children's Aid Society organized the trains. Charles Loring Brace founded the program. It was charity, it was humanitarian, but the numbers don't add up. 250,000 children over 75 years is an average of 3,300 children per year. New York City's population in 1860 was 813,000. The birth rate was approximately 30 per 1,000. That's about 24,000 births per year. For 3,300 children per year to be orphaned and sent west, the orphan rate would need to be nearly 14% of all births. That's not an orphan crisis. That's a demographic catastrophe. What was killing the parents? The orphanages themselves raise questions. In 1860, the United States had over 600 orphanages, housing an estimated 100,000 children at any given time. 100,000 children without parents, in a nation of 31 million. That's a rate that exceeds war zones. That exceeds plague years. That exceeds anything in recorded European history. The children had to come from somewhere. The official sources are immigration. Parents died en route or upon arrival. Disease, cholera, typhoid, yellow fever, industrial accidents, and poverty. Parents couldn't afford to keep them. But the orphanages weren't concentrated in immigrant neighborhoods. They weren't clustered around industrial centers. They were everywhere. Rural orphanages in Ohio, prairie orphanages in Kansas, mountain orphanages in Colorado. Children appeared in places where the official explanations don't reach, as if the children weren't orphaned, as if the children were collected. The photographs of the orphan children are disturbing, not because they show abuse or neglect. The opposite. The children are well-dressed, well-groomed, healthy. They stand in organized rows, wearing matching clothes, in front of buildings of remarkable sophistication. These aren't street urchins rescued from poverty. These are children who were cared for, educated, and maintained at significant expense. Where did the money come from? The Children's Aid Society was a charity. It operated on donations, but the scale of the operation, 250,000 children transported, housed, clothed, and fed, would cost billions in today's dollars. The donations to the Children's Aid Society don't come close to explaining the operation. Someone else was funding the orphan system. Someone with resources beyond any charity. The children's origins are suspiciously vague. When orphan train children were placed with Western families, they came with paperwork. But the paperwork rarely included parents' names. Birth certificates were often missing. Origins were listed as New York or Boston, with no further detail. Families who received children reported the same experience. They asked about the child's history. They were told nothing was known. How do you have 250,000 children with no histories? How do you lose track of 250,000 sets of parents? The record-keeping of the era was meticulous for everything else. Birth records, death records, marriage records, property records. But the orphan children existed in a documentary void, as if their histories had been deliberately erased. The Midwestern cities received the orphan trains, and the Midwestern cities had infrastructure they couldn't have built. This is not a coincidence. Consider the timeline. 1854, orphan trains begin. 1855, 1870, massive infrastructure appears in Midwestern cities. 1871, Chicago burns, records destroyed. 1872, Boston burns, records destroyed. 1873, 1875, financial panic. Many businesses close, records lost. By 1880, the earliest detailed records of city construction are gone. What remains are the buildings themselves and the official stories about how they were built. The children who arrived on orphan trains grew up. They became the population of the Midwest, but they had no memory of what was there before, because they arrived after whatever was there had been removed. Before we go deeper into these findings, before we analyze the census anomalies, the construction impossibilities, the institutional networks, and the deeper questions about what happened to the original population, If you're interested in these kinds of investigations, make sure you're subscribed. It helps support the research and lets me continue these long-form deep dives. Thank you. Now, as we move into the next section, we'll examine what the orphan trains were actually replacing, not supplementing, not adding to, replacing. A population that vanished from the record as completely as the children's parents vanished from the orphanage files. The census records contain traces of what was removed. The 1840 census of the Wisconsin Territory recorded a population of 30,945. The 1850 census recorded 305,391, a tenfold increase in 10 years. The official explanation is immigration, settlers pouring into the territory to claim free land under various homestead acts. But the 1850 census contains anomalies that immigration doesn't explain. The census records households, names, ages, occupations, places of birth. In the Wisconsin census of 1850, over 40% of adults listed their birthplace as unknown or left the field blank. 40%. These aren't immigrants who forgot where they came from. These are people who couldn't say, or wouldn't say, where they were born. The same pattern appears in Minnesota, in Iowa, in Kansas. Territories that were supposedly being settled for the first time had populations that didn't know their own origins. The instant cities of the West reveal the pattern most clearly. Denver was founded in 1858. By 1860, it had substantial brick buildings, a newspaper, and organized city government. In 2 years. From nothing to a functioning city in 2 years. With a population that arrived from back east, but couldn't specify where. The same pattern in Sacramento, in Portland, in Seattle. Cities that appeared fully formed, populated by people without clear histories, built with infrastructure that would take decades to construct. The official story is that American pioneers were exceptional, that they built with supernatural speed, that they created civilization from wilderness through sheer will and hard work. The evidence suggests something different. The cities were already there. The populations were already there. And then they were replaced. The school records provide another clue. The Midwest had functioning school systems by the 1860s. School buildings, curricula, teacher training programs, student records. The records show children learning reading, writing, arithmetic, and American history. A specific version of American history. A version that began with Columbus, continued through the colonial period, celebrated the Revolution, and presented the West as empty wilderness waiting for civilization. The orphan train children learned this history. Their children learned this history. Their grandchildren learned this history. Within 3 generations, the official narrative was unquestioned. Whatever existed before the orphan trains arrived was forgotten, because the only people who might have remembered it were gone. The institutional infrastructure appeared alongside the orphan system. Schools, hospitals, churches, government buildings, all built in the same architectural style, all appearing in the same time period, all following the same organizational patterns, as if they were following a blueprint, not a local blueprint, a national blueprint. The same building designs appear in Ohio and Oregon. The same institutional structures appear in Maine and Montana. The same systems replicate across thousands of miles. Before telegraphs were common, before railroads connected, the country, before any practical means of national coordination existed. How do you coordinate institutional development across a continent without modern communication? You don't, unless the institutions were already there, unless the blueprint was inherited, not created. The fire pattern reveals the final piece. Chicago, 1871, burned. Boston, 1872, burned. Baltimore, 1873, damaged by fire. Seattle, 1889, burned. Spokane, 1889, burned. Jacksonville, 1901, burned. San Francisco, 1906, burned. Every major American city with substantial pre-war construction experienced catastrophic fire within a 40-year period. The fires destroyed records, deeds, census documents, birth and death certificates, business records, Personal correspondence. After the fires, the cities rebuilt, with new records, new documentation, new official histories. Whatever paper trail might have revealed the true origins of these cities was conveniently destroyed. The fires weren't all accidents. Investigations at the time suggested arson in several cases. But the investigations were closed. The findings were sealed. The official story became accident. Someone was burning the evidence. The population figures after the fires are revealing. Chicago's population in 1870, 298,977. Chicago's population in 1880, 503,185. A 70% increase in 10 years, during which the entire city burned down and had to be rebuilt. Normal population growth during reconstruction is minimal. People leave. Economic activity collapses. Recovery takes decades. But Chicago didn't just recover. Chicago exploded. Where did 200,000 additional people come from? The official answer is immigration. European immigrants flooding into America during the Gilded Age. But the same pattern appears in city after city. After fires, after disasters, after events that should have caused population decline, the populations grew, as if people were being moved in, as if the cities were being repopulated, deliberately, systematically, according to a plan. The orphan train children grew up with no memory of what came before. Their children had no family stories beyond the train rides. Their grandchildren knew only the official history. By 1920, the original population of the Midwest, whoever they were, had been completely replaced by descendants of the orphan trains and post-fire immigrants. A demographic replacement completed in 60 years. Whatever culture existed before, whatever language, whatever memory, whatever evidence, gone, replaced by Americans who knew only one story, the official story. The question that haunts all of this is simple. Where did the original population go? If the cities were already built, if the infrastructure was already there, then someone built it. Someone lived in it. Someone maintained it. And then they were gone. Not migrated, not absorbed. Gone. 250,000 orphan children with no histories. Cities with infrastructure for populations that don't appear in records. Fires that destroyed every paper trail. Immigration that refilled the emptied spaces, and a population today that believes the official story because their ancestors arrived after whatever happened, happened. The Tartarian hypothesis provides one framework. The theory suggests that a previous civilization, sometimes called Tartaria, sometimes called the Old World, built the cities we inherited. A catastrophe removed them. A reset. A mud flood. A deliberate cleansing. The survivors were scattered. The children were placed in orphanages. The infrastructure was claimed by new populations who were told they'd built it themselves. The orphan trains weren't charity. They were repopulation. The fires weren't accidents. They were evidence destruction. The official history isn't ignorance. It's programming. This theory cannot be proven with the evidence that survives. That's the point. The evidence was deliberately destroyed. The witnesses were replaced. The memories were erased. What remains are anomalies, patterns, questions that the official story cannot answer. Why do cities have infrastructure beyond their populations? Why did 250,000 children have no histories? Why did the same fires strike the same cities in the same time period? Why do census records show populations without origins? These questions have never been answered. They've been ignored. Because the answers might reveal that America wasn't built by pioneers. It was inherited by them. And the original builders, millions of them, were removed so completely that even their children didn't remember they existed. The orphan train records are now being digitized. Family researchers are combing through the archives. DNA testing is revealing unexpected connections. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren of orphan train riders are finding each other, comparing notes, asking questions, and some of them are finding that their ancestors don't match any known immigrant population. Genetic markers that don't appear in European databases. family trees that dead-end before the orphan trains, histories that begin on a platform in Kansas with a tag pinned to a child's coat. The evidence is emerging, slowly, fragmentedly, against tremendous institutional resistance.